Hi, everybody. Welcome to Delivery. This should be the first video in Delivery that you watch. There will be another one coming up later on, but this is just about the basics. Let's get right into it today. All right, so my ask for you, this is the intent of the presentation that I'm giving to you today. I'm just going to get right into that, is to watch yourself and reflect. Ask yourself what you like and don't like, and we should be talking about it either through the Google Doc or in person. Just chat with me and we'll figure some stuff out together, right? So that's my ask. Why? Why am I asking you to do this? I should have an answer that has something to do with you, like what's in it for you, just for reviewing some other things from other presentations we've talked about. And the answer is reflection will help. It will help you engage others more effectively, and it will help you perform better in the class. So hopefully my ask today resonates with you all and has a good enough sort of message that connects to why you should be doing the ask, which I had here, right? So intent, message, and then of course a message has two parts to it typically. One part is why the intent, and the other is sort of the overall point of the content that I'm going to be sharing. And that's this right here. My overall point is that there are really three main things I want you to think about when we're thinking about strong delivery. We're talking about movement, gestures, those sorts of things. We're going to talk about eye contact, and we're going to talk about speaking in a varied format with a clear structure. All right, so I want to get right into it today because time is valuable for you. So let's start with when you're not moving, right? We're talking about movement to get started here. When you're not moving, I have a picture. I found this online. Actually, this is like the only image that you can find that kind of fits what I'm looking for. But it actually is pretty effective at sharing what you should be striving for when you are sort of standing there and presenting with confidence and clarity. You should have a comfortable at-rest hand position. Your hands should not be by your sides. They should not be in your pockets. You should have them ready to go, and we'll talk about gesturing in a minute, but when you're not gesturing and you're not moving, have them in a comfortable at-rest position. Your legs and feet should be distributing your weight evenly. Your feet should be either shoulder width apart, or they should be, if you don't feel comfortable doing that, they should be completely together. And lastly, your feet should be facing the audience and pointing straight forward. And again, if you do a little jump right before, not like a big jump, but a little jump right before you present, your feet will actually land pretty perfectly shoulder width apart. Just like in football or soccer, if your feet are pointed in a particular direction, the ball tends to go in that direction. It's the same as your eye contact. So you want to keep your feet as forward facing as possible so that you're not ignoring different parts of your audience. So that's just sort of an overview of kind of what you want to strive for. Obviously, for every person, there are nuances and changes that we will make that make, if you think, make you look more comfortable. So don't take all of this as gospel, but these are sort of baseline thoughts to get started. Here's an example of a student who has a pretty strong stance, right? He's not moving around. Forget the gestures, forget the eye contact. I know he's a little bit slanted, but his legs are actually, his feet are actually facing forward. You wouldn't know it because he's turned towards me a little bit, but at the end of the day, he's got a pretty strong stance. He's not shifting around, and that's the sort of thing I want you to think about. So again, I want to talk a little bit more about non-movement stance for your at-rest hand positions. Again, I found another image here of Meghan Markle. I think she's got a good shoulders back. Her hands are high. The higher your hands when you're gesturing, which we'll get to again in a minute, the better. It keeps your shoulders back. It makes you taller. Make sure that you're like looking out. It really does matter. And having your hands at a comfortable at-rest position, which is somewhere just around your belly button, again, it will depend on the person, makes you more able to do that more quickly. So, I want you to take a look. Some people are somewhat critical of how she looks right now. Fine. We're not talking about Meghan Markle. We're talking about you. But I just want you to think about where you put your hands. And again, take a look at the student. She's got a pretty good sort of non-movement at-rest hand position. So notice she's not clasping her hands, like she's not, in a prayer position. Her hands are not by her sides. They're up and ready to go. To me, this is a good start. And again, we can figure out what works best for you personally as we go through the class. What about when you do want to move around? What does purposeful movement actually look like? This student does a pretty good job of taking a couple of steps at a time. She doesn't just shift back and forth on her feet. She steps 1 to 2 of her size steps in each direction to make her point. And not only does she do that, but in a moment you'll watch her actually move over to the slide, which is another really important way that you can actually use effective movement. And through the magic of editing, because there was a camera issue, I just kind of moved into this sort of perspective here, but you get the idea. She's now literally moving across the slide and showing us her presentation while she's moving around. I actually show more on this in another video later on, so stay tuned. Okay, so look, nerves can make movement less purposeful. That word there says less purposeful. Lots of reasons. We shift around on our feet. Some people shift actually like kind of on their waist. They will turn, they'll move away, they'll face the slide, all sorts of things that we do. And a lot of that comes from nerve and anxiety. Just a couple of things to think about in terms of how to manage that or avoid nervous movement. You can look at these on your own. Just take a quick scan. I'm not going to go into them in too much detail. Locking your legs, not your knees. Locking your knees can be dangerous, but locking like the quad, like the upper thigh part, you make that tense, it tends to stop your legs from moving around. Or putting your feet together, right? If you stick your feet together, you're not going to move them if they're touching. So just think a little bit about how you might avoid some of those nervous movements. I know it says inflict slight pain. I just want to make sure I do not condone self-harm in any way. This just happens to be something that people talk about. You take like a pen cap or something and you stick it in your hand like this, and you can't see it when you're presenting, but you push. I'm pushing like this right now, and it does. Some people say it sort of redirects the nerves and makes you I don't know, focus a little bit more. Something to think about. Breathing is awesome for getting you centered. No one is going to no one's going to judge you if right before your presentation you just do a little welcome, right? I mean, it's totally fine to do that. Obviously maybe not have really deep, right? But, otherwise I think it's totally fine. Shaking hands, right? Laughing, these things do things to the chemicals in our body that actually relax us and get us more focused. So, all these things are things that you can think about, and we can talk about them one-on-one if they're interesting to you. The very last one I'm going to get into a lot more detail in class is using your visuals so that you are putting so much more of your presentation on whatever visual. It becomes a partner, and then it takes some of the anxiety away. Again, we'll talk about that a little bit more later. Gestures are movement too, right? So I want you to think a little bit about the zone that you have for your gestures. The zone should be like this. It should go straight across where your shoulders are, all the way down to your belly button. I could put myself in full screen, but I don't need to do that. Just make a big square around your body, and that becomes the gesture box, if you will, that you kind of want to keep your hands in for most of the time. The idea is to keep them up. You don't want to gesture down by your belly button. That just doesn't you want people to look up. You want them to look at your eyes and your face. This is where you're going to have your persuasive power. This is how you're going to get people up looking at you. I have a friend who works at Steinhardt in the vocal performance area discipline, and she's constantly trying to get the audience to look at the actor and actresses' faces, their eyes, because this is where the power and the emotion come from, right? So gesture up, obviously not in front of your face, but as much as you can in this box. And when you want to make a really big point, then you can go out of that box, but you want to stay in the box for the majority of the time. That way you're not losing credibility by always being out here and being a little bit crazy. Emphasize main points, gestures that have counting. This is so helpful. There's 3 points that I want to make. 1, 2, right? Or this is higher than this, right? Or this is lower than this. Those sorts of things, again, make comparisons from here to here. Show things, right? This is a phone. This is a coaster, right? You get the idea. So let's take a look at someone who has some really strong gestures. So here she is. She's, keeping her gestures high. She's mostly staying in the box, and then when she's making bigger points, she goes out. She's doing a lot of different types of gesturing. Again, don't look at eye contact as much or other things. Just focus on the hands, right? Just really focus on when she's staying in the box, when she's going out, and how high her hands are. Look, reflection helps, right? I've said this at the very beginning. I want you to think about how you reflect on your delivery performance, and I'm giving you some baselines today. And I've told you that if you do that, it's going to help you engage more others more effectively and perform better in the class. There are 3 areas. Here's another area I want you to think about, which is looking at critical points in the room. There are 2 major points that I want to make within this subsection here. One is to focus in particular areas of the room, and 2 is to focus on particular time. So in terms of the areas, focusing on that unibrow area, like right above the eyes, a lot of people find that helpful. Looking straight in the eye can sometimes make people uncomfortable or they get nervous. Whatever works for you is what you want to accomplish here, as long as you're looking at like key points in the room. Let's say 4 key areas, maybe even 5, where you're talking and you're looking and you're moving around so that you're getting everyone, right? Kind of looking in this unibrow area is helpful for some. We'll see how that works for you. I also want you to think about how long you look at different areas of the room. Focus on either like 3 to 5 seconds, or for some people that's kind of difficult to count as you're presenting. So one thought. If I'm going to make a point, I'm going to finish my thought. It doesn't mean that's the whole like 2-minute point, but maybe there's like a 5 to 10 second thought that I have, and then I'm going to flip around the room. I think you get the idea. So again, looking at critical points is really important. Focusing on both the areas of the room and the time that you're spending in each area. And take a look at this video. It's a pretty strong example of eye contact. Our group's recommendation. So here we have a student who is trying as hard as he can to get all the way around the room without darting his eyes too much, right? So especially now, if you look in here, we were looking at about 3 seconds on this side. He's going to move now over here. We're going to have another couple of seconds. He, of course, referred to the slide. He's talking about his colleagues. But you get the idea. He's doing a great job of making sure everyone in the room feels like he's looking at them for a few seconds at least, and not just darting around the room. And he's definitely covering the entire space, and he does a pretty good job. So eye contact connects you to your audience. I think that's quite clear. Obviously, I'm talking about doing this in the United States primarily. There are other places where eye contact like that is maybe a little less appreciated or culturally appropriate. So, we can talk through that as well. You can read audience reactions. You want to avoid doing some of this robotic movement. And obviously, we have to think through this according to the size of the room and the audience itself. One kind of side point that I'm just going to make right now, I left this in here. This PowerPoint is not parallel. This slide happens to have a lack of parallelism. So I just want you to see that like eye contact varies, enables, avoids, and differs. These are the benefits to connecting eye contact to your audience. And then there is one that's sort of not fitting there. And this part of speech is not correct. So grammatically it is not parallel, and it's also not conceptually parallel, because everything else here is telling me benefits to eye contact, and this is more of a command, like you should find a friendly face. So I just want you to think about that. This should just be gone. I should have it out, but I left it in there so I could talk about it. Again, when you think about the PowerPoint slides, which is a whole other thing that we'll talk about, make sure that you're parallel. It just keeps your points popping, right? All right, so again, another reason why you should be thinking through your performance for the class and engaging others and like looking at your baseline delivery style happens to be in the way that you actually speak and convey the information in a varied format. I do want to talk about 2 things in this area. One is actually the variation of format. So that's like the intonation and volume and some of those sorts of things, speed, pauses. And I also want to talk about the structure. So those are the last 2 things we're going to talk about here. So again, I want you to vary your rate and volume as much as possible. Inflection and enunciation are important. Taking a breath to avoid fillers, right? So if you're an person, you can sort of breathe through that, and it does actually take away a lot of the filler words. We can work on that, right? So if you're trying to avoid and you replace it with an actual breath, it can actually do 2 things. It gives you a little bit of a pause, and it removes the filler word. Not for everyone. It's not a perfect solution. We're going to talk about this. These are baseline things, like I said. Inflection and enunciation, these are also important things. I talk very fast, so I try really hard. I'm trying to keep these videos short and sweet, to the point. Don't want them to be an hour long, so I'm talking pretty fast. You have the opportunity to stop and review if you need to. In real life, we don't always have the ability to do that. So even if you're a fast talker like I am, even if you can make make pauses in between, it can go a long way to getting your audience to absorb what it is that you're trying to say. So watch how this student actually asks a question and answers it. This is one of the ways that you can get a little bit more variation. You can change the intonation, you can change the pitch, and the ups and downs of your voice. Just watch. She'll ask a question, then she'll answer it. She does a pretty good job with enunciating and articulating and changing up her tone. Take a look.
Now, in terms of your reputation is great. In the eyes of many, Disney is still a wonderful, wonderful place. So why would you even need to do anything about it? Well, people are starting to talk. And not just any people. People like Abigail Disney, Bernie Sanders, even cast members themselves, people with a lot of reach and a large network of people and a large platform to make their point on, are saying things, and this could potentially turn into a negative consequence for Disney. Now
Of course, that was a little speedy, and I want you to have another example of someone who incorporates a little bit more pausing and sort of a slower speech, and it certainly goes a long way of being effective. Take a look.
What are the differences? One, we know that Mickey's like happy, great, we love him, right? Shamu, he's known as like the killer whale and all of that associated with SeaWorld, right? So far, this negative brand reputation hasn't impacted Disney. But our neighbors just down the street, SeaWorld, they have to deal with this just a couple of years ago.
Okay, so definitely thinking about that, and also thinking a little bit about structure, okay? Remember that the average presentation, you've got the audience's attention at the beginning, and it dies out very quickly and doesn't really come back, and not nearly to the same point when you're actually closing out. Most people forget pretty much everything in the middle. The more that you can repeat your message and repeat the overall sort of what you're trying to convey throughout, and have these sort of what we call intermediate conclusions, the better attention you're going to get over time. So even just looking at this, you have audience attention here, you have time here. And if you are able to sort of kind of push that message throughout, yes, there's a little bit of a dip, but it's nothing like the average presentation. Really helpful. Again, thinking about how you structure, this is going to be hugely important in my class. At the individual level, when I'm focusing on your delivery style, it's not just how well you gesture and move and speak, it's also the way that you structure it. So you should come in, you should have an overall point, it should be supported by 2 or 3 points. You should say all of that in the beginning, you should make your points, and then you should close out with the same thing that you started, right? More or less, right? Keep it symmetrical, keep it structurally sound. It works, okay? Baseline delivery style, something to think about. And in fact, I want you to think a little bit about what I've done here. And just again, the intent and the message, right? And the overall, right? Like I started out telling you that I wanted you to reflect. I told you that it helps. And I told you there are 3 real ways that you're going to be able to do that. And throughout this presentation, I reminded you of that. I was kind of explicit about it, to be honest with you, just so that I could make this point now. But the idea of having sort of this sort of mini reminder within the actual presentation that I am asking you to reflect, that these are baselines, and there are 3 major areas I want you to focus on. And each of these areas are yet another way that you can engage more effectively and perform in the class, which is why I want you to reflect. Hopefully that is pretty symmetrical, and you've seen that begin and end throughout the presentation. This is the sort of structure that I'm talking about that I want you to think through. And again, we can talk about that in a ton of detail throughout class. Last but not least, just some overall advice that sort of closes this out. Again, doesn't add anything new, but sort of different way of saying everything that I've said. Think about how you speak, think about how you look, think about how you move, right? These things really do matter. And in fact, I can share this in class with you. There's a link down here that looks at research from Amy Cuddy that specifically talks about the more that you can deliver and structure and be ready to go, and the more that you're like posed in a certain way, and the movements that you're making, they actually have an internal confidence boost. They can do a lot for you to be able to sort of speak more clearly, get what you want, that sort of thing. So, and again, she does a very good job on her TED Talk. I'm not trying to deliver her TED Talk here. You can watch that on your own. Again, just to close out, and I know this is very clear at this point, hopefully, there are 3 keys to strong delivery. You're going to focus on your movements and gestures. You're going to look at critical points in the room and think about time. You're going to speak with enunciation, volume. You're going to adjust your pacing and that sort of thing. And you're going to structure your presentations in a very clear symmetrical format. If you can do all of that, you're going to engage more with your audience. You're going to get them to remember the things that you're saying. And yes, in this class, you will perform better. That's why I want you to watch yourself and reflect on these 3 key areas. Think about what you like, what you don't like, and yeah, you should communicate that stuff with me. Thanks for watching.